Hello and welcome back to Tima Ballers podcast. And today's episode will be about Chelsea and their transfers because there's so much to talk about, right? They have signed 36 players as well as 2 players on loan and spent a staggering 1.16 billion pounds since the Todd Boehly takeover. So therefore more than £1 billion. When was the last time a club in football or anywhere has spent 1 billion in the space of a couple years? And what has really happened? Have Chelsea really bottled it? Have they bottled £1 billion? Let's get right into it. Because on the surface level, when Todd Boehly took over the club, Chelsea were 3rd place. They just had 2 cup finals which they lost. The season before they won the Champions League, and then of course they won the Club World Cup. So Chelsea were clearly a club who were not necessarily challenging for the title, but they were in the top 4 and they were in finals and winning trophies. Since then, they dropped down to 12th the season before. They were 6th last season, losing to Liverpool in the League Cup final defeat 1-0. And then this season, they're currently 5th. They are only 6 points away from top of the league and 1 point away from Arsenal. So it's not been a bad start for Chelsea at all. But we're not talking about the start because, of course, the sample size of 9 league games will tell us nothing. What we really need to analyze is, have Chelsea really spent this money well? Because when you tell me more than £1 billion to spend, of course they sold lots of players, they made a lot of money from it. They sold Havertz, Mason Mount, and many other players, a lot of academy players. 11 academy players in this period were also sold. But when you tell me that you can spend £1.16 billion, I think you can probably win the league with that, surely. Surely you can just stack up with the likes of Bellingham and, I don't know, Caicedo and whatever, you name it. Sign a whole 11 of world-class superstars. Isn't that going to be enough to win you the league? Well, Chelsea have done something interesting. They've decided to go quantity rather than quality perhaps and sign a whole army of players. And what's funny is that some of these players who were signed in this 2-year period already left. So Raheem Sterling, Kalidou Koulibaly being examples, as well as Denis Zakaria, who a loan that never worked out. So there will be more, we'll get into it. So let's just analyze this. When Todd Boehly first comes in, obviously Chelsea had massive trouble, Thomas Tuchel being the manager, and it seemed like at first their approach was to go for a mix of expensive, more promising players like Wesley Fofana, but then focusing on more experienced and proven players like Raheem Sterling, Kalidou Koulibaly and Wesley Fofana. And at the time they were highly praised for signing Sterling Koulibaly. Both of these signings were really highly rated because they were very successful before that. Ultimately they never worked out because Koulibaly left next summer and Sterling has never went even close to his Man City form. And Aubameyang also left the club. Then we see a shift. We see a shift towards numbers. Chelsea started to spend more on youngsters. And in total, the spend in the winter of 22-23 was around £450 million. They signed David Joshua Fofana for 10 million. They signed Benoit Badiashile for 33.7 million. They signed some guy called Andrei Santos for 11 million. They signed Mikhailo Mudryk for 88 million pounds with add-ons. They got Noni Madueke, Malo Gusto, and of course they got Enzo Fernandez for a staggering £107.8 million. So really beginning to up the spend. That does not pay off. Chelsea finished 12th place. The next summer the spend continues as Mauricio Pochettino comes in as manager. They spend quite big on Moises Caicedo, £115 million. Just shocking, absolutely shocking. They also spent £53 million on Romeo Lavia, £31 million on Nicholas Jackson, £23 million on Ugochukwu, £38 million on Dizazi, and £40 million on Cole Palmer. Of course, Cole Palmer is one of the best signings in recent years. He's a sensational player. But Chelsea upped the spend. They continue to try to go for numbers. And since then, of course, they have made more acquisitions, such as Pedro Neto for £51 million, Joao Felix for £42.6 million, Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall for £30.2 million, and lots of other players, some of them very young, like Omari Kellyman, Aaron Angelissimo, Renato Vega, Caleb Wiley, Mark Gui. So a lot of players, essentially. The tactic is to try to sell their own academy players to get a pure profit and then buy up all this young talent. The idea being is, from a financial perspective, you are buying young players whose asset price, like an asset, is expected to appreciate. So since you think their value will appreciate, you can then move them on later on. Even if you buy them, loan them out for a couple seasons, they do well, and then you sell them. And I guess that there's a similar thinking with some of those other young signings. They're signing a lot of young players from Brazil, and next year they'll have another young Brazilian winger coming as well. So the case really is a sense of you're trying to bring in these youngsters and hope they appreciate in value. Quite a shift of strategy. So already looking at this, there is uncertainty, and Chelsea seem to be a bit confused. They start off by signing experienced, more proven players. Then they try to go for big money, Madueke, Fernandes. Then they go to try to get a mix, and now they're trying to just sign a lot of players and a lot of numbers of players. But let's talk about why has this not led to Chelsea being better? Because Chelsea are worse than when Todd Boehly came in. Clearly, you can ask the question, hasn't it completely failed? Well, undeniably there have been good signings. Cole Palmer is a fantastic signing for £40 million, arguably one of the best players in the Premier League. Also, Noni Madueke being a star signing, as well as Malo Gusto, two very promising players who have really proven themselves. Nicholas Jackson's proving all haters wrong, and he's actually scored in the top 5 most goals in the Premier League in this calendar year, so he's really proving himself. So you can argue there have been positives. I think Pedro Neto was another exciting signing from Wolves, but the fundamental problem is Chelsea have not won a single trophy, and they finished worse with all this money spent. And where I think Chelsea went wrong is in several ways. So first of all, they're overpaying. This is the problem number one. They're paying way too much money. Enzo Fernandez was never worth £107 million. This is a player who joined Benfica for like less than £20 million. He had one good World Cup, and suddenly you think that he's worth £107 million. And we're talking about a fee that Jude Bellingham, Declan Rice, we're talking about some of the best football playing players in the world being valued at that figure. And you're buying a guy who only recently even became known, and you're spending £107 million in what is only a gamble that he will be worth it. Although we all know so many examples of players doing fantastic international football and then not being able to replicate their form in club football. The simple reason being international football is slower paced. You're playing against different oppositions in a different team. So there was never any guarantee that he would replicate that World Cup form for Argentina at Chelsea, and not surprisingly, he has not. Moises Caicedo, £150 million. Again, he's a class player, but he's not worth £150 million. Neither was Romeo Lavia, £53 million. Southampton were even asking for £50 million. You paid more to outbid Liverpool just to get the player. Mikhailo Mudryk, arguably one of the worst signings in Premier League history. We're talking about one of the most expensive signings in recent years in the Premier League. And this guy scored 5 league goals last season. He scored 0 league goals in the first season. And so far he's played 5 matches and scored 0 goals as well. So 5 league goals in what is 51 appearances. That is not good enough. 1 goal in 10 games, and you are paying £88 million for that. And he doesn't seem to be really improving massively either. It's not like he had a slow start and now he's phenomenal. He isn't. Then I would also argue that Dizazi was another really overpriced signing. It's just almost like they're overpricing a lot of the signings. Fofana, 70 million, not worth it. 70 million pounds is more than Matthijs de Ligt, who is a well-proven European established centre-back. It's literally the same as what Everton were asking for Jared Brentwaite, and even they couldn't sell him for 70 million pounds. And Jared Brentwaite, by the way, one of the best centre-backs last season. You're overpaying for Koulibaly, who was already 31 at the time. And you're also paying these very high fees for these youngsters like Anselmino, Vega, Kellyman, Wiley, Jorgensen. People have barely even heard of it. I watch football all the time. I read about football all the time. And I've never heard of these guys. And you are spending tens and tens and tens of millions of pounds. If you were to collect the entire sum of all these lesser known players, you will get a figure way more than £100 million worth of unknown players with the hope that they might sometime become good. And arguably they haven't. Renato Viegas had some good games, fair enough, but what about all the others? The problem with Chelsea then, leading on to my next point, is the number of players. What are you doing signing so many players? Right? So Enzo Maresca was asked, you've got 45 players, isn't that a mess? And he's like, I only work with 21. Well, that's the mess. You can't have so many players. You've got so many players that some of them aren't even training with you because you can't fit them all in. You're trying to go for quantity, but when will these guys get the minutes? Let's just look at the current situation. Chelsea have got, as striker, they've got Nicholas Jackson, Christopher Nkunku, and also Mark Gui. Sounds fine. In terms of wingers, they've got Madueke, Sancho, Felix, Neto, and Mudryk. So all these players have to play in the other two positions because you've already got two strikers in at number 9. So the other two wingers have got to be one of these 5. Plus you've got all these youngsters as well. So then we end up with this problem. You've got 7 players for 3 positions. And mind you, these players are not just youngsters, unproven players. We're talking about players who are already, even Mudryk, they're not young, they're not 19-year-olds. These are players who need minutes. If you want them to get better, they need to play. They're being paid wages, and Chelsea have been careful in terms of handing out wages. They give these gigantic 9-year contracts, but they don't really pay these gigantic wages like United would, for instance. But I don't understand how you're going to play 7 attackers, or senior, all on wages, which aren't low by the way. All these players want to play. And we're talking about 7 players for 2 positions in attack. And I'm not even talking about Cole Palmer, who can play right wing as well. So, and by the way, I'm not even mentioning all the youngsters who should also be getting minutes. Your academy does exist, by the way, and you have signed all these other youngsters, by the way. So, how are you going to fit them all in? How are they all going to play? Because then you're going to get into squad issues because players are not happy, they're not getting the minutes. I mean, look, Joao Felix hasn't really gotten many minutes at all. And rightly so, because where is he meant to play? This is the issue with Chelsea. How are you meant to fit all these players? Mudryk has only played 5 matches out of 9 in the Premier League. How are you going to fit these players in? Because you simply don't have the space. And of course you need rotation, but even Man City don't have this level of depth. Not Liverpool, not Real Madrid, not nobody, because there's no need. Joao Felix, again, 5 appearances for Chelsea in the Premier League. You're simply not letting these players have time. So it is a bizarre strategy. You've overspent and now you've got too many. So rather than going out and spending a very high fee on someone like Osimhen as number 9, that would transform your team and take you to the next level. Rather than trying to go out there and spend a lot of money on a few key positions and elevate your squad, you've signed too many and now they don't fit. And Raheem Sterling you've had to give to Arsenal, and you are now paying Arsenal essentially 200k for his wages for him to play at Arsenal. That's a brilliant illustration of the mess that you got yourselves in. You're giving your attacker to your arch rivals and paying more to his wages than they do. In midfield, there's another mess. Chelsea have signed Ugochukwu, Caicedo, Lavia, and Enzo. Now, by the way, all these players I would classify as DMs. So they're more defensive midfielders. They're not attacking midfielders, they're not central midfielders. They are literally defensive midfielders. That's where they play for their teams. And they've spent a total fee of more than 300 million already on these players combined. More than 300 million pounds on DMs. Right. Why are you spending 300 million pounds on DMs? Why do you need so many DMs? What was the point of signing Romeo Lavia when you already signed Ugochukwu a couple months before, and then also signing Caicedo? And now you've loaned out Ugochukwu. Fantastic. He's going to come back and play when and where? Caicedo has to start. Enzo's got to start. Cole Palmer always will play at number 10 because he can't go to right wing. There's no space there. He's got to play number 10. Hello? Where are we going to fit in Romeo Lavia? Ugochukwu? Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall? Omari Kellyman? Where are you going to fit all these players? You're going to have massive squad issues which you've self-inflicted, because what you could have done is planned out, okay, let's spend a lot of money on a striker. To make our team even more world-class, let's get a £80 million winger. Let's go out and get a brilliant winger For instance, Olise. Let's go spend big on Olise to have a top-class right winger. Let's spend £100 million on Osimhen. There we go. We've got 2 world-class players in there, and then have a few more like Madueke and Neto. That's what I call effective planning. Whereas with Chelsea, it's more like they get some money, spend. They get some money, spend. It's almost like if I were to give you £200 every few months, right? And tell you go buy yourself something. And you buy yourself something. And over the course of 2.5 years, you've spent the equivalent of let's say a big gaming PC or a big or a nice laptop. So rather than spending all these smaller amounts on things that weren't worth it, wasn't it better to save up for something nice? Because that's precisely Chelsea's problem. Let's go to defense. Pretty sure Chelsea have 8 keepers. They've spent £1.1 billion plus, and they've got Robert Sanchez at keeper. And let's be honest, if we were to do a ranking of the best keepers in the league, where does Robert Sanchez rank? A backup keeper for Brighton. Because I'm telling you, ain't nowhere near Alisson, Edison, David Raya, Vicario. Maybe Onana. He's maybe better than Onana, fair enough. But even Mark Flecken at Brentford, this guy's making better saves than Robert Sanchez. Because Robert Sanchez might be good with his feet or whatever it is. He might be good for distribution. But the main thing a keeper must do is catch. And he's been making mistakes. Made a mistake against Brighton. His saving isn't really world class. And it's interesting how Chelsea have elected to spend whatever it was, £35 million on Sanchez, and then spend the remaining billion plus on everyone else, which included other keepers. I don't understand that. And then they got Petrovic, who was actually very decent last season, and now he's loaned out. So the keeper who actually did well for you is loaned out. Fantastic. What a great job. And I'm not even going to start talking about Chelsea's previous madness with Romelu Lukaku and Kepa Arrizabalaga. By the way, Romelu Lukaku, what an absolute mess of a transfer that was. So let's move to centre-back, shall we? So Chelsea do have quite a lot of centre-backs. They've got Colwell, who is the academy player, Fofana, Dizazi, Badeshile, then Tosin Adarabioyo. So you look at the 5 centre-backs. That's not a bad squad depth, plus other youngsters. But you ask yourself the question, was there a need to sign these 5 centre-backs when you could have probably focused your money on someone who is really worth it, like Jared Branthwaite, a brilliant, strong, quick centre-back, or someone like Matthijs de Ligt, a proven player who will bring that maturity, bring that experience? Because your centre-backs are all very inexperienced. Colwell is very young, inexperienced. Tosin comes from Fulham. He hasn't got the experience of being in the top-class team. And then the other players, the same principle. You haven't got any experience in the back line. Not a single player in the defence, apart from Reece James, who's always injured, and Ben Chilwell, who never plays. You haven't got the top-class experience. And you had the money to sign those players, right? You could have gone out there and spent money on someone like Lenny Yoro, who is a future generational young centre-back. On someone like Matthijs de Ligt, who is a brilliant centre-back. On someone like Kim Min-jae, who by the way at the time was very highly rated. Instead, you've elected to spend money on centre-backs who most people haven't heard of. I'd be super surprised if you ever heard of Benoit Badeshile before he came to Chelsea, or of Axel Dizazi. And they have proven to be quite mediocre, right? A lot of them were quite mediocre. And the only centre-back who was quite decent for you was Trevor Chalobah. And guess where he is? He's been shipped out as well. So despite this gigantic spend, you haven't even got any experience in your back line. You've overspent on DMs when why spend 300 million plus on DMs? You haven't even bothered to sign yourself a top-class striker. You're having to rely on a £35 million Nicholas Jackson to do the work for you when you had the money to go for any striker you could have liked, any striker you could have signed. Victor Osimhen, who you weren't willing to pay the wage for, when you spent 1 billion plus, and you don't even want to get the most important thing to your squad, and that is a clinical goal scorer, that poacher in the box who you've refused to sign. So overall, Chelsea's transfers seem like a mess to me. I know some people will defend it. Some people will argue that it's going to come good, but I don't see how. I just don't see how. I cannot understand this narrative around, well, the strategy isn't working yet, but in 2, 3, 4 years' time, they'll come good. when you spend £1 billion plus on players, you expect results, right? You expect results. If I pay £150,000 on your car, the expectation is for the car to work now, not be like, yeah, this car is going to reach its prime later. No, when you spend so much money, you need the players to do the work for you. You need them to be there for you. You can spend all the money you like on a combination of experience and young ability, whatever you like. You can get the perfect blend. You can go out and sign some experienced top-class professionals like, for instance, not saying they could do that, but for instance, someone like Jude Bellingham and Declan Rice. You can then go for experienced, less proven talent like Lenny Yoro and Jared Branthwaite. You can then go for other players and this and that. But instead, Chelsea have gone for this confusing mess of quantity over quality. And I will never understand how that can ever be praised as a strategy. When you have such money available, you go for any transfer strategy should be a mix. It should be balanced. You need to get the experience and the young players. Chelsea have signed experience, which then they sold and they don't play. And then you've got youngsters who haven't proven themselves and don't have enough minutes because you signed way too many players. And that's why so many players are not developing. That's why so few players upon coming to Chelsea have actually shone. Of course, Cole Palmer is an exception. I'd say Noni Madueke and Malo Gusto also being rare exceptions. I don't understand. Why would you spend £1 billion plus and yet then rely on Tosin Adarabioyo, a free transfer from Fulham, to be the experienced centre-back in the back line? You're being serious, right? You've spent £1 billion plus and you're signing Tosin Adarabioyo on a free. With that amount of money, you could have signed anybody you like, wherever you look. I can't even begin to say who they could have signed because over the past 2 years, dozens of centre-backs have been available. Dozens of centre-backs have come and go. And you're telling me they couldn't find anyone? Nowhere. So Spurs have signed Van der Ven, United have signed De Ligt and Yoro and Martinez. Then Man City have signed Gvardiol. Gvardiol, by the way, brilliant player, really talented, youngster, proving himself more and more. Why didn't you go for someone like that who is actually young and actually quite proven at the top level? You've gone for youngsters who are not even proven. And now you're praying for something to get better when you could have had that better already now. So I will not understand this rhetoric of Chelsea will come good. I think they've got a lot of fantastic players. They've got a lot of talent. But this talent will find it difficult to come good because there are too many of them. And I was very, very harsh when I predicted them 9th below West Ham in my predictions. That was wrong. That was completely wrong. I just was a little bit... It's almost like when you come up with a certain idea, like I did, right? I went too far with it. I think I'm right in the sense that Chelsea will still struggle. They will at best get top 4, which is, I think, unlikely. I think Aston Villa will get it. And Chelsea will be nowhere near the title or any big trophies because, simply put, what are you doing with that transfers? You know, I look at that lineups you're posting now, right? The lineup which you have, that is not the lineup of a team who spent £1 billion plus. We know Man City spent probably a similar amount over a much longer period, and they've now won 6 and 7, right? Arsenal spent half that sum in a few years, and look at them now. They're challenging for titles, scoring 89 points. Liverpool spent like a third of that, and we won the Champions League and the Premier League. I will not accept the logic that spending 1.1 billion plus and then not winning anything is good enough. This was a flawed strategy in my opinion. I think it doesn't make sense to be shipping away all your young talent, especially when you are selling good players like Ian Maatsen, Conor Gallagher and Trevor Chalobah. And the players who are signing in return seem at best sometimes scattergun appointments, desperate signings like Romeo Lavia who made no sense at the time, and you keep on changing managers. So one manager comes in, ideas change, player in the bin. One manager comes in, players in the bin. And we've seen it with Nkunku, who is now benched ahead of Nicholas Jackson, Koulibaly, Sterling going out, Aubameyang going out, some of these youngsters like Chukwuemeka being completely forgotten, and even now recent signings like Enzo Fernandez wasn't starting in some games. Because why would you spend so much money on him? Chelsea have, I think, made a mess of it. Honestly, I think they've made some good things. I think had they adjusted their strategy for a better mix of experience and age level, had they actually used better technical and sporting directors who would actually better sporting directors and scouts to actually find the right players. There are structural issues at the club. It seems there are internal problems between Todd Boehly and Clearlake, which are further adding issues because you haven't even got unity within your management. How are you meant to have unity in the squad? And these things pass on, and we can see it because your strategy keeps on shifting, you know? Experience, big signings, small signings, young players. What are you all about? What next? Are you going to sign players from MLS? From Australia? Like, what's the next strategy? I don't know. I think that's a bit of a mess personally. So that's my analysis on Chelsea. Thanks so much for listening to this rather analytical video on Chelsea. I still think they'll have a better season than I predicted. I still think they might come good in the sense they might be in the top 4. They might win some cups, but I don't think Chelsea will be winning the Premier League unless they were to somehow spend more avoiding FFP issues, which again, I doubt they'll avoid it. At some point, they're going to land into trouble. If you keep spend, at some point you'll get caught for it. We see with Man City, it might happen with Chelsea. I know they've been selling assets in a smart way, but there's also a point at which no matter how many assets you sell, no matter what amortization contracts you use, you can't spend 3 billion in 5 years, can you? The spend will go down, and Chelsea will have to work with this team. Will they be able to make it successful? Personally, I don't really think so. But let me know down in the comments below. Please like and subscribe on the YouTube channel. All support is very much appreciated. Thank you so much for listening, and see you soon.